that social studies and humanities are the friendlier passages. So for prose fiction and natural sciences, they're unique and they're a little bit different than social studies and humanities. And you can either call it social studies or social sciences. It's the same idea. But with these, it's really straightforward. They've got great structure. The first paragraph is going to be an introduction. The last paragraph is going to be a conclusion. And then everything in between is going to be the body paragraphs. So the key to getting points on these questions is to stay focused and to create a really good passage map, which thankfully is a lot easier than it would be in prose fiction, and even a little bit easier than natural sciences because you don't have any weird terms, any scientific terms that you've never heard of before, like acidophilus. So when you take a look at social studies and humanities passages, think about how you don't have to do everything in order, and think about which passages you want to tackle first. So some of our students like to do social studies or social sciences first. Other students like to do humanities first. Some students actually are really great at prose fiction. So make sure you've taken enough practice tests and done enough practice questions that you know which to tackle first on test day. So you don't want to spend 5 minutes thinking, well, what should I do first? Because that's 5 minutes you wanted to use for actually doing the questions. So starting off with our recommended approach, we want to remind ourselves why we're taking notes, and so we can predict a really strong answer and then match our prediction to answer choices. So when you're reading the questions, identify clues, and we're going to be doing that together. We have 3 questions for each of the passages, even though on testing you'll have 10 questions. We wanted to give you a good taste of what you'll see. For our social science or social studies passage, we are taking a look at violence, actually. This is a really good representative passage of literary level, so it's not an easy one to read, but it's also one that has really good structure. So this is a great example of how using the structure of a passage, even if you're not sure exactly what they're saying, is going to make a difference for your score. So if you read a paragraph and you think, I'm not exactly sure what that was about, just think about how it related to the previous paragraph. If it's the introductory paragraphs thankfully are going to contain the thesis. So if you're not sure what the whole thing is about, at least narrow it down to the thesis. Now, before you read any of the passages, the little information at the top, so it's over here, you want to read it. Don't skip over it. And take a look at the information here. It tells you that it describes 2 types of violence and possible causes. That's actually going to help us out. That information there is going to help us out with one of the questions we're going to do. So go ahead and pause the video to read the first paragraph. Now that you've read the first paragraph, we want to write some notes down. So the whole idea of this passage is going to be about understanding unconscious motivations and how they help us to understand violence. So the whole passage is telling us what we can do to understand more about violence, because it's more than just, I'm angry, I'm going to throw things. So we're using that to our advantage. Go ahead and pause the video to read the next paragraph. So the topic sentence of body paragraphs are really valuable. So the most normal and non-pathological form of violence is playful violence tells us that this paragraph is likely going to be focusing on just playful violence. So playful violence. So for our notes, it's just playful violence with examples. I'm not going to write out all the examples in my notes because they're already in the passage. So your notes are either going to provide the answer to questions, or they're going to just show you where to look for your answers. Go ahead and read the third paragraph. We have moved on from playful violence, and now we're talking about reactive violence. So reactive violence has to do with defense, fear, and self-preservation. We are ready for our fourth paragraph. This is the first part of the fourth paragraph. Go ahead and read this part. Now the second part of the fourth paragraph finishes up on this slide. So the fourth paragraph is all about reactive violence is based on perception. So if you are just standing on the sidewalk and someone says, "Oh, a ladybug," I don't know that you're going to react with violence unless you happen to have some sort of vendetta. You need to seek revenge on all ladybugs. But if you're standing on the sidewalk and says, "Oh, an attack dog," then hopefully you're going to either run or be ready. I was going to say lion. That's much. We don't want you worried about dogs. Let's say it's a lion. Oh, a lion. Then yeah, you might be ready to defend yourself. The chances that a lion is going to be coming at you while you're standing in a sidewalk are pretty slim, but you want to be ready. So if you were holding a bag of groceries and a lion comes to attack you, you may swing the bag of groceries at the lion, whereas you're probably not going to swing the bag of groceries at a ladybug. It has to do with perception. So if you feel like you might be attacked, or you feel like you have to defend yourself or your life or your family, then you may react very, very strongly. Go ahead and read the 5th paragraph, which is down at the bottom of this slide. For the 5th paragraph, we're talking about how people respond to that threat. So overall, the author is talking about the idea of violence and the ideas of what we're thinking about as humans before we commit violent acts. And then finally, we have our conclusion. We're looking for how the author wraps up this idea of violence. So go ahead and read this final paragraph. And what we see is that violence can be produced by frustration. So it started off with the idea of, okay, understanding what's going on in one's head is very helpful in understanding violence. Then we said, okay, well, some violence is playful violence. And it's interesting that in the passage they say, oh, when you're playing war games and someone gets shot by an arrow, it's not, oh my gosh, someone was so mean and he wanted to kill that person. It's more like, oh, darn, that person was in the way. Like, oops. So playful violence, even though it can lead to catastrophic things, like someone dying, it's not built to display violent acts. It's just sometimes accidents happen when you're doing things like that. When it comes to reactive violence, yes, it is very likely bad things are going to happen, and it's not because people just want to walk around being destructive. It's more that people will defend their families, will defend their lives, and will even defend their property. And then finally, they didn't want to leave out this idea of sometimes people get violent when they're really mad. And it has to do with the idea that they want to achieve a goal rather than they're just angry and want to smash things. So for example, I like to think of when my nephews, they've got great aim for little kids. And so I've been hit in the head more than once with a sippy cup. I can tell you though that most of the time the sippy cup is empty. So my nephew is trying to tell me, he uses sign language, but he'll say more, or he'll just throw the sippy cup at my head. So he's not trying to actually give me a huge bump on my forehead, which has happened, but he's trying to tell me he's all out of water or milk or juice or whatever he's drinking. So he's frustrated, but he's not actually trying to hurt me. He's trying to tell me that he needs more juice, and he's trying to get to that goal of more juice. So when you're thinking about the different types of violence the author presented, break it down into those 3 types. We have playful violence, we have reactive violence, and then we have violence that's produced from frustration, which is also in the reactive violence category. So here's an interesting way that they structure questions. It says, as it's used in the passage, the phrase paranoid delusions of persecution, lines 75 to 76, refers to. And here is what we wrote. When you match up the line references, you're going to find out that it is paragraph 5. We wrote down how people respond to perceived threats. That's what we wrote in our notes. Match that with an answer choice. So you didn't even have to go back to the passage. Just go back to your notes. Paragraph 5 was all about how people respond to a perceived threat. Find that in the answer choices, and you've got your point. So when you create a strong passage map, your passage mapping should take you 4 to 5 minutes at most. It should never take you longer than 5 minutes. You're going to hopefully be spending 30 seconds or less on questions, because take a look at answer choice H. An individual's perception that he or she is being threatened. Paragraph 5 note was how people respond to perceived threat. Bingo. That is perfect. So taking a look at how the work we put in our passage map equals points, it's really valuable for testing. Now we have, as it is used in the passage, the term reactive violence primarily refers to, that's in paragraph 3. Reactive violence equals defense, fear, self-preservation. Answer choice G, violence undertaken in the defense of life and freedom. The end. That question has points to it now because we were able to create a really strong map. Final question for this. According to the passage, people who react violently when frustrated. Now for this one, we have Violence can be produced by frustration. So here are our options. Have replaced constructive motives with destructive ones, are reliving the frustrated experiences of their childhood, want to take revenge on the source of their frustration, or do so in order to achieve their desired goal. All right, well, based on our note, we don't have enough information. We need to go back to the passage. So going back to the passage, you can find the answer over here. Such aggressive behavior constitutes an attempt, although often a futile one, to attain the frustrated aim through the use of violence. So frustrated aim, to attain another way to say aim is goal. Can we find that in the answer choices? Can we find they're trying to reach a goal? Answer choice J. Done with that. Social sciences is a great area to grab more points. Prose fiction oftentimes has a lot of inference questions in it. What we saw here, you're going to find detail questions, you're going to find main idea questions. It's really neat that you're able to get a lot of points just based on your passage map. Now, the main idea question for this particular passage, we're actually going to save it for next week. And we're going to talk about how those italicized words at the very beginning are super, super helpful in identifying main ideas. So actually, next week is English and science, so it's the week after that. We're going to be talking about the main idea question. For humanities, it's really similar to, and I'll put this down here, it's really similar to social sciences. So we are looking for a thesis in the first paragraph. Don't forget to read. It says the following passage is excerpted from Brightening the City. So that sounds like a positive title. So it sounds like we're going to be talking about something that has to do with improving. So go ahead and read the first paragraph. The first paragraph talks about how cities became grimy and colorless. That doesn't sound so fun. Ooh, look how dirty the city looks. That's not great, but the title of it's supposed to be Brightening the City. We're thinking it's going to get a little bit better. So go ahead and read the first part of the second paragraph. And the second paragraph finishes up over here. What we have here, Westerners were anti-color, but ancient civilizations favored color. Third paragraph. Now that you have the third paragraph, one idea is to think about other cultures nourish vision through color. Wait, but what does that mean? So they nourish vision. Well, another way to say vision, they say spiritual and imaginative vision. So if you're writing these notes down and you think, oh, I wouldn't write that, then change it a little bit different. So other cultures, you could say, nourish spiritual and imagination. Either way you want to write it, just make sure you have this idea of color is very representative of things that they want to have in their culture, things that they want to be highlighting. Go ahead and read the fourth paragraph. It starts with fortunately, so we know something good's going to happen. So recently bringing color back to cities. Now keep in mind that this was written in, I think it said 1994. So by recently we mean not really recently, but recently to. Now we have first part of paragraph 5 and the second part of paragraph 5. So paragraph 5 is about murals and facades were making a comeback. The sixth paragraph is pretty small. Go ahead and read during the 1960s down to the word. In the 1960s, we have a pop art movement. Paragraph 7. And one thing you can do as you're reading the passages, you can circle names, dates, people, and places. So we were in the 1960s in paragraph 6. By the 7th paragraph, we're at 1967. And finally, last paragraph is going to provide a conclusion for what the author was talking about. Final paragraph is, the purpose of street art is to improve quality of life, which makes sense given the title that we found out in the small excerpt information and the title that the author chose. So now once you've got a good passage map, you've got 10 questions to answer. We have 3 for you right here. So according to the passage, the creation of murals first became part of a popular art movement during, hey, that's right in our passage map. We like when that happens. During the 1960s. Done and done. If it wasn't in your passage map, go back and look for where you circled names and dates and figure out where it became a pop art movement. So not when it was first introduced, but when it actually became popular. The passage states that somber neutral colors came into wider use in Western cities, primarily because, well, cities have become grimy and colorless. They're gross. So what can we do? Well, oh, and actually, it should be over here. I apologize. Sometimes in our Adobe room, it just moves things around. Here we go. It should be here. I'll show you in just a moment. Here we go. It should be answer choice J. Towns and cities were becoming increasingly polluted. So that's the correct answer. Silly check mark in the wrong spot. And then main idea of the passage. Okay, so we know that it was brightening the cities. It was a positive thing. In paragraph 8, it says purpose of street art is to improve quality of life. All this is all very, very good things. So go ahead and find a really good answer, something that sounds positive. And that's going to be bold colors in street art positively affect urban environments. Yay! So when you have a really strong passage map, you're going to be able to grab more points in less time. So we're going to reduce your stress and increase your scores. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to practice everything that we talked about this week. And you're going to get to the point to which you're going to recognize questions you do really well and questions you want to continue to work on. For reading, make sure you identify what passage order you want for test day. So we can say many students like to do social science, humanities, natural science, and prose fiction last. And that way they're going in order for 3 and then doubling back over for prose fiction. So if you're not sure what to do, try that out. See how you do with that, and then adjust accordingly. So you can do this all on your own. If you don't want to work with other students in group practice, no problem. You can use your study plan on Grocket, and we're going to show you how to use the Red Book as well. But in terms of math, oh my goodness, it's so much easier to do your study plan or to join in the group games than it is to try to find all the specific questions in the Red Book. So you're going to be completing segments, let me use a green arrow, 8 through 15. So that's going to be over here. It's actually everything. So at this point, at the end of this week, you should have done everything except for 2 segments. So you're going to have that blue color. It's going to be colored in all the way up except for 2 segments. And then for reading, you're actually filling up your whole reading this week. You already did 18 questions during week 2. You're ready to fill it all the way in. Because what we're going to do next for reading is we're going to talk about wrong answer traps, and we're going to talk about question types. But in terms of the types of passages that you've already have gotten information about, you've covered everything. So you're not at a resting point for your score. You're going to continue to improve your score, but you're done with in terms of knowing what the passage types are. So join in group games if you prefer to do that. Those are available in the group practice tab. Or if you are using the Red Book, it's super easy to use the Red Book for reading. You are just going to complete questions 11 through 20 and 21 through 30. So basically 11 through 30. I broke it up into 2 separate pieces though, so you know that the first is social studies and the second is humanities. In your Red Book, it's labeled social science. For math, we want you to complete questions 31 through 50 in the 3 practice tests you've already done. You've already completed questions 1 through 30. It's not going to match up perfectly with what we were talking about, but it is a good way to get in a bunch of practice. And then not next week, but in 2 weeks, you're going to be doing the last 10 questions of all the 3 practice tests that you've worked on previously. So for week 5, it's all about math and reading, adding on 18 points of math, adding on 18 points of reading, and practicing so that as you